Hi leaders, we're back again for our last week of session 3, and it's called A Picture of Your Life. This is our last video with David Nasser. It's the last of the Paul the Apostle series, so make sure that you really use this week to wrap up your conversations that you've been having with your group. So the first section you're going to see in the book is an excerpt out of Grace Anatomy by David Nasser. Again, this is really more of a background piece for you as a leader, not necessarily something you need to share with your group, and really it's more of the story of what happened to David when he ended up at St. Paul's Outside the Walls, and we'll get to a little bit more of that when we get to talking about the video. But really the first part in the book is the intro piece, and that follows up on last week's challenge. So if you issued the challenge to write a letter of encouragement to your group, just make sure you follow up at some point in time during your lesson with that and see how that exercise went. If you didn't, feel free to skip over this part. The next section in the lesson this week is the icebreaker section. It's rebus puzzles. I'll have a packet like this, probably 4 or 5 copies available on the cart outside of the multipurpose room this week. If you know for sure you want a copy, let me know and I'll stick one in your leader folder for you. Otherwise, it's kind of first come, first serve. Other ways you can share that with the group is you can write them out just on your whiteboard. You could even share the page that's in your book with your group and kind of let them quiz themselves. The answers are on the next page, so as long as you fold the page around so you can just see the one side with rebus puzzles, it shouldn't be a problem with your group. Because this week has a really good activity at the end of the lesson that I want to make sure you guys have time for, and because there's some high schoolers who are going to make a big announcement about 30-hour famine during large group, we're only going to do one video this week at 7:05. So meet quickly with your groups at 7 o'clock, hustle everyone into the multipurpose room. We'll do a couple announcements quick, and then we'll start the video. So you guys should hopefully be back in your classrooms no later than 7:15, 7:18 or so. So just try to be as prompt as you can for that 7:05 video time. This last session, David Nasser is really trying to connect the pieces that we've seen of Paul's life, from his conversion to his interactions with other travelers and other churches, all the way until the point where he's imprisoned and put to death. We've seen kind of these snapshots throughout his life, and David's really trying to explain to us that we also have snapshots and pieces that come up as part of our faith journey. And he's trying to relate that to the 36 frescoes that he sees in St. Paul's Outside the Walls. And I think he does a really good job, and I'll include a link for you as well to take a virtual tour of St. Paul's Outside the Walls if you want to do that, and warn you, keep the sound down, it's pretty loud. But the visual itself is really impactful as you can kind of move through these different steps of Paul's life. And so the assignment that kind of comes with this week and this project that's a little later in the text is really an opportunity for you to look at your own lives and say, okay, what are 5 or 6 big events that stand out in my faith and stand out in my story and have had an impact on who I am? And I think it's a great challenge. It's a great thing we should be looking at. And the way that David really connects that to who Paul was and Paul's story is really impactful in this lesson. One of the ways David really gets at this point of connecting Paul's life and our life in the lesson is through the discussion questions. And the last question there is really important to me when he asks, are servants of God supposed to be perfect? I think it's something we get caught up on a lot in our lives, that we feel like we have to have something done perfectly, or something has to meet a certain standard, or it has to look a certain way for it to be right and to be good. And so this can be a good question for your group, even if it's the only question out of this discussion section that you do. I'd really encourage you to have this conversation. Are servants of God supposed to be perfect? And realistically, your group's probably going to be like, nope, and try to move on from it. But talk to them about it and get them engaged in that idea of what then does a servant of God look like, and help them understand that that's who they are, and they can all serve God in different ways, and their own lives are going to serve God in a different way from Paul, or from you as a leader, or from me, or Pastor Liz, or Pastor John. They're all going to look a little bit differently because we all have different purposes, we all have different gifts, and God's really calling us to do different things. The Bible section this week I think is really good. It can be really heavy and a lot of content if your group doesn't move through it very quickly. It starts out with Paul's conversion story in Acts 9, and that's broken up into a few questions over a couple different sections, and then it moves on to a couple pieces out of Galatians. Really, if you haven't done Paul's conversion story, I recommend that section on Acts 9. If you've done it, feel free to skip it. But the section I think that would be really good for you to kind of dig into if you want to do a dig into Bible section is this Galatians 2:19 through 21. The questions get in there and they really break down these verses that it's by Christ that we live. Paul really does a really great way of explaining that, and the questions kind of take it piece by piece and ask, what does this mean and how does this apply? So that could be something that could be really good with your groups. And like I said, every week, feel free to pick and choose what works best for your group. If they're not catching on to something, feel free to move on to the next piece. The last question in the Bible question, I think, is also really good. What snapshot of Paul's life spoke to you most? Now, this is something that originally was written to apply just to this week's lesson, but I think could fit with anything we've learned about Paul in the last 5 weeks. You guys have done a lot of discussing. You've seen Paul from a lot of different aspects. And so realistically, I think it's a great way to just have conversation about what the last 5 weeks have been and what you've learned and how you've encountered Paul in new ways. I know for me, it was last week and seeing Mamertine Prison and seeing how and where the letters of Timothy came out. That for me was huge. And so I encourage you as a leader to figure out what in the last 5 weeks has been impactful for you. Maybe it's something from this week, maybe it's something from weeks past. Whatever you've learned and has really just changed the way you're looking at things or has interested you, share that with your group. Let them know that you're learning in this process as well. The last piece is really this challenge piece that goes along with the handout that your group should have called My Fresco. And it's this blank sheet, so you can see through to the other side. But it's a blank sheet and it's got these 6 or 7 spaces to talk about snapshots from today and snapshots for tomorrow. And really what it is it's a way of looking at where you've been in your faith and setting goals for where you want to go in the future. And that's a really lame way of explaining it, but really what it does is it gives us something to strive for. And I especially recommend this exercise for 9th grade groups. If your 9th grade group has been asking questions about the Faith Project, do this exercise. This is going to give them a great place to start from because it's really going to help them identify some places in their life that they may want to talk about in their project. They may want to take something that's happened to them in elementary school or in middle school and live into that. For me, it probably would have been my parents' divorce and all of the emotions and everything that came with that, and my way of connecting at camp and at church and at youth group that really blossomed my faith and really gave me a space to understand who God was and understand what God was doing in my life. I can think of moments in my head of when I was at camp and at campfires and what that impact was and what God was doing in my life. And I can think of times in Sunday school when we would have people come in and speak to us, and I remember their messages, and I remember songs and stories in VBS that still speak to me and have importance. So any one of those things can be a good jumping off point for a Faith Project. If you're a 9th grade leader, I really, really recommend this activity. I really recommend you continue having conversations about this and encourage them to keep this in their folders if they're still kind of struggling with where to go with it. This is a good exercise. Now, even if you're not a 9th grade leader, 8th grade leaders, this is a fantastic, fantastic opportunity for you to get to know your small groups and get to know even your quieter, more reflective kind of kids in your small group. This can be a good activity to get them sharing and to get them thinking about what God is doing in their lives. The snapshots for tomorrow section can be a little fuzzy. It can be a difficult piece to kind of wrap your head around, what are some things that I would want to do with my faith? You'll get a lot of things like, I want to read the whole Bible. That's a great thing. Be realistic. Don't set it out as like, I want to read the whole Bible in the next year. Most kids aren't going to do that unless they're daily Bible readers already. It could be something as simple as by the time you're in college, you want to maybe lead a Bible study. It could be while you're in your 20s and 30s that you want to go on an adult mission trip. It could be that in your 40s, 50s, even into your 60s that you want to lead Sunday school, that you want to be a part of a church choir, whatever it may be. They don't have to be super concrete, and we're not necessarily going to push them to really live into these things right now, but especially in that middle school and high school stage, help them see where God is in their lives right now and help them see what in the next few years they can be doing. It could be as simple as being a part of a Bible study, or reading your Bible on a daily basis, or going on a mission trip. Those are all great goals that someone may want to dive into, but encourage them to ask the deeper question too of why. What about that is important or interesting or holds value for you? So that's what I have for you for the end of this session. Our next session is into Lent and everything goes home. So make sure you hand out the session 4 packets tonight. I'll have extras at the desk and on the cart if someone needs them. I strongly encourage you to come to Wednesday night Lenten services and be involved with Soup Supper. Come for Ash Wednesday. Come during Holy Week. I'd love to see you. I'd love to see you interacting with your students. And if there's someone that you feel like may not, necessarily come or connect in that same way, I encourage you to invite them personally. Reach out to them and say, "Hey, Katie, I'd love to join you for worship on Wednesday night. Why don't you come and sit with me?" That personal invitation can sometimes be all they really need to show up and be present. And there's so many more of you than there are of me. And so while I try to do the same thing, I'd love to see you doing it as well. And so hopefully you're excited about Lent. Hopefully you've got plans for small group already put together. If you need small group outing permission slips, I'll have printed copies on the cart tonight, as well as included in the email. So whatever way works best for your group. But hopefully you are excited about the opportunity to worship with your own families and engage with kids and families in a different way than we've done in the past. And I'd love to hear your feedback about how session 3 went since we started this year, and how session 4 goes as we go through the month. So please feel free to reach out as things come up. In the meantime, though, this is what I have for you. Take care, guys. Bye.